Before we begin, don't forget to like, share this story with someone who loves vampire romances. Leave a comment telling us what you'd do in Elira's place, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Gravenfall was a place time forgot. Nestled deep in the belly of a black forest, the village seemed perpetually cloaked in fog, its crooked roofs and narrow stone paths worn by generations of fear. People walked quietly here, never after dark and always with their heads down, as if the mist itself listened. In a narrow wooden cottage at the edge of the village lived Elira. She was no one, really, just a seamstress. Poor, quiet, unnoticed. She lived alone, her parents taken by the sickness that swept through the village years ago, and since then, she had survived by sewing clothes for the villagers. Her hands were skilled, delicate like bird bones, and her work was beautiful. But beauty, in Gravenfall, meant little. Survival was the only currency. Elira rarely spoke unless spoken to. She had no friends, no family, only the sound of the needle-piercing fabric and the whisper of her breath in the cold morning air. Her days passed in silence, her nights in fear, like everyone else. For in Gravenfall, they knew. They knew of the creature that lived in the castle beyond the veil of trees. A monster, some said. A demon, others whispered. But the oldest villagers called him by name. Velkan, the vampire who ruled these lands centuries ago. He made a pact with Gravenfall long before Elira was born. A blood promise, peace in exchange for sacrifice. Every decade, the village would offer one soul to the castle, and in return, Velkan would keep the village untouched by war, plague, or famine. And now, 10 years had passed. Again, it was time. This year, the name drawn from the sacred urn was Elira's. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. She stood, her thread-stained fingers trembling slightly, and nodded. She had always known, somehow, that her life would not last long, that the silence she lived in would one day be matched by a deeper, colder one. The villagers whispered apologies, but none intervened. They never did. The ritual was law, and Velkan's wrath was legend. Elira was given a single night to prepare. She returned to her cottage, her breath shaking as she lit the single candle in the window, a symbol that the chosen had accepted her fate. She didn't pack. She didn't write a final note. She simply sat at her table and picked up her needle. What else could she do? With hands steadier than expected, she began to sew. She chose her finest fabric, a deep crimson velvet, and began crafting a simple, elegant dress. It would be her burial gown, the final thing she'd ever make. A garment fit for death. Stitch by stitch, hour by hour, the dress came together, and as she worked, her mind wandered, not to fear, not to horror, but to a question she'd never dared ask before. What does a vampire feel? Does he sleep in silence? Does he ache? Does he remember? When dawn came, the forest howled with wind and the carriage arrived, black with silver wheels and no driver. It waited at the edge of the village, steam rising from its flanks like breath. Elira stepped outside, the crimson dress clinging to her like a final prayer. The villagers watched from behind curtains and shutters, eyes filled with guilt. But no one stopped her. She climbed into the carriage. The door closed behind her, and just like that, she was gone. The ride through the forest was silent and endless. Twisted trees scraped the sides of the carriage like claws. No sunlight pierced the canopy. It felt like falling into a dream from which one never wakes. When the carriage finally stopped, Elira stepped out into the courtyard of Castle Varn Hollow, a monument of stone and shadow. Ivy covered its crumbling walls, bats circled high above its towers. The air was cold, ancient. The door opened on its own. Elira walked inside. The hall was grand, high ceilings, black marble floors, and chandeliers that hadn't held fire in centuries. But it wasn't empty. There, standing at the far end of the room, was him, Velkan. He was taller than she imagined. Pale as moonlight. Dressed in obsidian black, his eyes glowed faintly like dying embers. Not red, not gold, something deeper. When he spoke, his voice echoed through her bones. You are not what I expected. Elira met his gaze. Neither are you. A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise, amusement, she couldn't tell. You do not beg. Most do. I have nothing left to beg for. Silence fell. Velkan stepped closer, slowly, each movement impossibly smooth. And then he stopped, inches away, his eyes locked on hers. Your face, he whispered. It is familiar. Elira frowned. You must be mistaken. But he shook his head. No, I remember, from a dream, or a life long lost. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't, because for the first time in her life, Elira felt seen, not as a sacrifice, not as a servant, but as something else, something more. And for the first time in centuries, Velkan felt something stir in his hollow chest. Not hunger, not rage, but something dangerously close to longing. The castle walls echoed with silence. Velkan hadn't moved since Elira spoke. His eyes, those deep glowing wells of forgotten centuries, remained locked on hers, as if searching for a name just out of reach. Elira could feel his gaze traveling through her, digging through time, through blood. She didn't flinch. Though everything in her body begged her to run, she stood there, tall in her crimson dress, sewn with her own trembling hands, the hands of a girl resigned to die, and now frozen in the presence of something impossible. He stepped closer, slowly. She could see the faint shimmer of veins beneath his porcelain skin, hear the unnatural silence around him. Not even the wind dared to move near the vampire Lord of Gravenfall. What is your name? He asked, voice low like thunder beneath the earth. Elira. He breathed in the word like a spell. Elira, he repeated. There was another. Long ago, she had your eyes, the same stubborn quiet, the same scent. Her breath caught in her throat. You mean someone I resemble? Velkan's gaze didn't waver. No, I mean you. He turned suddenly and walked away. The long coat he wore fluttered behind him like a shadow with purpose. Elira stood there, stunned, until he called over his shoulder. Come. She followed, not knowing why. Her heartbeat thrummed like a snare drum in her ears, but her feet obeyed. Something ancient echoed in that hall, something more than stone and spellwork. He led her down a corridor lined with faded portraits, noble men and women with cruel eyes, bloodlines carved in oil, until they stopped before one painting, dust-covered, crooked. He wiped it with his sleeve, and Elira gasped. The woman in the portrait was her. Not someone who looked like her, not similar features. It was her face. Her very expression, even the small mole beneath her left eye. Velkan stared at the painting for a long time before speaking. She was named Aveline. She was a healer, a mortal. She saved my life once, many centuries ago, and I loved her. Elira could barely breathe. What happened to her? Velkan turned slowly, and in that moment the timeless cold in his eyes cracked. I killed her. The silence that followed was unbearable. Elira's voice shook. Why? I had not fed in weeks. I was hiding, hunted by my own kind, broken and half mad. She found me in the woods, nursed me, tended my wounds, and in a moment of weakness, I lost control. He said it not as a confession, but a curse. She forgave me, even as she died. I remember the look in her eyes, not fear, not anger, just sorrow. Elira looked again at the portrait. It was undeniable. She didn't just resemble Aveline. She was her, or a shadow of her, or something older still. I've never seen this painting, she whispered. I've never been outside Gravenfall. I don't understand. Velkan took a step closer. There are old magics, Elira. Some souls return. Some fates repeat until they are broken. Perhaps you were sent to die, not as punishment but as penance for both of us. She stared at him, searching for a lie, but found only sorrow, centuries deep. And then something strange happened. He reached out, slowly, carefully, and touched her hand. His fingers were cold, but not cruel. His thumb brushed the calluses on her palm, the ones born of needlework and solitude. He looked down at them as though they were sacred. "No one has touched me in 300 years," he said softly. Not with gentleness. Elira didn't pull away. "I wasn't taught to fear you," she said. "I just assumed I should." Velkan looked up. "You don't fear me now?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But I'm not afraid to be here." Something shifted in the air. Not magic, not danger, but something quieter, more human. The sound of possibility. That night, Elira was not locked in a dungeon, nor chained in a chamber. Instead, she was given a warm room within the east wing of the castle. A fire had already been lit. A tray of food, real food, waited for her. Velvet drapes hung over arched windows, and the bed was so soft she feared it would swallow her whole. She didn't know what this meant. If it was a game, a delay in the inevitable. But she slept. For the first time in days, she allowed her eyes to close without tears, and in her dream, she stood by a river of stars, her hand held by a man with glowing eyes. He whispered her name, not Elira, but Aveline. And when she woke, her pillow was damp with tears. Far across the castle, Velkan stood before the same portrait, a goblet of untouched blood in his hand. "Aveline," he whispered, "have you truly returned to me?" He looked to the window where moonlight bled through the glass like silver mist. For the first time in 3 centuries, the hunger in his chest was not for blood, but for redemption. The morning in Castlevarn Hollow never came with sunlight. Instead, it arrived with a dull silver mist that bled through the tall windows, casting everything in quiet hues of blue and gray. Elira stood by the window, her fingers tracing the frosted glass. Her thoughts were knotted, like threads in a torn hem. She had come here to die, yet she woke in silk sheets, with no chains, no screams, only questions, and memories that weren't hers. She dressed herself slowly in a gown left for her, pale lilac silk, stitched with ancient embroidery she couldn't recognize, yet somehow felt familiar. The fabric whispered against her skin like a forgotten lullaby. As she descended the stone staircase, she was met by a young woman in a long, dark coat. "I am Marine," she said softly. "The caretaker of the castle. Lord Velkan is waiting in the observatory." Elira followed her silently. Her heart beat low and steady like the rhythm of a loom. The castle halls were even more vast by daylight, or whatever passed for daylight in this place. Tapestries lined the walls, epic scenes of war, betrayal, ancient blood oaths. But one, near the observatory, caught her breath. It showed a woman, dressed as a healer, surrounded by wolves and stars, reaching her hands out to a man cloaked in darkness. Their fingers almost touched. She didn't have to read the name woven at the bottom. Aveline. Velkan stood alone by the giant window, his back to her. The sky beyond was thick with storm clouds. "I never meant for you to stay," he said, not turning. "I never thought I would see that face again, not like this." "I don't remember anything," Elira replied. He turned slowly. "Yet you dream." She hesitated. "Yes." He stepped forward, stopping a few feet from her. "You dream of the river of stars, the hands that held yours, the voice that calls you by a name not your own." She swallowed. "How do you know that?" "Because I have the same dream, every night for over 300 years. The words struck her chest like a forgotten melody returning. Something in her soul ached, not from fear, not from confusion, but from longing. "What does it mean?" she asked. "I don't know," he said, his voice raw. "But I know this. If it is true, if you are her, I will not let you die again." Later that day, Velkan led her through the old library, a cathedral of books untouched by time. Dust floated in the air like snow, and the smell of parchment was thick and sacred. He pulled a book from a hidden shelf, its cover bound in silver thread, its title lost to time. This book belonged to her. To Aveline, he said, handing it to Elira. I kept it all these centuries. Elira opened it. Pages of drawings, plant sketches, handwritten recipes, herbal mixtures, remedies. But then, near the center, journal entries. One caught her eye. The castle is cold, but he is colder. Yet I see sadness in him. He is not a monster, he is broken. Another. I dream of another life, of a fire, of dying in his arms. Elira's hands trembled. These weren't just Aveline's memories. They were hers. I know this sounds mad, Velkan said. But you are not the girl they sent to die. You are something older, woven into me like fate. Elira looked at him. This vampire, this ancient being who had killed her once, and never forgiven himself. I don't know what I believe, she said, but I feel drawn to you. Velkan stepped closer, slowly, as if each inch were sacred. So do I. He lifted her hand, kissed it. Not like a predator, but like a penitent. His lips were cold, but her skin burned. That night, as Elira lay in her bed, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, heart racing, mind restless. She wasn't afraid of dying anymore. She was afraid of remembering everything. Meanwhile, Velkan stood on the castle ramparts, alone in the wind. Marine appeared beside him. She remembers, doesn't she? Fragments, he whispered. And if she remembers it all? Velkan's jaw clenched. Then I will not make the same mistake twice. The days passed like whispers in Castle Varnhollow. Elira no longer counted time by sunrise or sunset. The sky remained a permanent shade of ash above the black forest. Instead, she marked her days by the moments spent with Velkan, and the memories that began to bleed through her soul like ink on silk. Each memory came not like a vision, but as a feeling. The smell of crushed lavender reminded her of a garden she had never walked through. A particular melody played on the old piano stirred a sorrow she couldn't name. And in Velkan's presence, her body sometimes moved before her mind, reaching for him, turning toward him like instinct. Like something ancient inside her already knew the rhythm of his soul. That afternoon, as rain drummed gently on the windows, Elira sat by the fireplace reading from Aveline's journal. Velkan watched her from across the room. You look like her, he said, voice low. She looked up. And yet, I'm not. Not yet, he replied. She closed the book. I don't know what I'm supposed to become, Velkan. You say I'm her, but I have no life beyond this. I was meant to die in your halls. That was all I was ever given. Velkan stood and approached her slowly, his black coat brushing the floor. Then let me give you more. He knelt before her like a knight before a queen. Elira, if you are truly her soul reborn, then I owe you more than redemption. I owe you your life, your freedom. Elira's breath caught. What do you mean? There is a ritual, old, forbidden, one that can restore a soul's memory fully, but it comes at a cost. What cost? Velkan looked into her eyes, and in that moment she saw the fear even a vampire could feel. If it fails, your soul may shatter, and if it succeeds, it will return all of Aveline's memories, her pain, her death, and her love for me. Elira's heart thundered. And what would that mean for me? You would no longer be just Elira, he said gently. You would become both. That night she stood in the mirror and stared at her reflection. The girl in the glass was Elira, pale, small, scarred by a hard life. But behind her eyes, something else stirred. A shadow of grace, a memory of tenderness, the trace of another life. She knew she had to choose, to remain as she was, a seamstress with borrowed time, or to awaken fully, and remember the love that once burned across centuries. At midnight she found Velkan in the old sanctuary beneath the castle. Candles burned in a perfect circle. Ancient runes glowed faintly along the stone floor. I'm ready, she said. Velkan's jaw tightened. You don't have to do this. I do, she replied. For me, for her. He nodded. They stood across from each other. Velkan took her hands in his. In life you saved me, he whispered. In death I failed you. But in this life, I will not let you go. He drew a silver dagger and sliced his palm. Dark, ancient blood dripped onto the altar. Elira hesitated, then took the blade and cut her own hand. Their blood mingled. The runes ignited. The air turned heavy. Time bent. Elira's body trembled. Her knees buckled. Her mind split, flashes, fire, screams, a forest at night. A kiss under starlight. Pain. Love. Death. She collapsed. Velkan caught her. Elira, he cried. Her body shook violently, her eyes rolled back. Then, silence. When she opened her eyes, minutes or lifetimes had passed. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. I remember, she whispered. I remember everything. Velkan's breath caught. She touched his face with trembling fingers. You carried me through the fire. You wept when I died. You never stopped mourning me. He knelt before her, head bowed. I never will. She lifted his face. I am Elira, and I am Aveline, and I forgive you. In that moment, centuries of guilt shattered, and something new bloomed. Hope. When Elira awoke the next morning, the world felt different. Not the castle. Its walls were still ancient, its windows still blanketed in fog, but within her something had shifted. The weight she carried as Elira, the sorrow she bore as Aveline, had found balance. For the first time in either of her lives, she felt whole. She descended the stairs with steady steps and found Velkan waiting by the grand piano, his eyes already watching the door, as if he had sensed her coming before she arrived. She smiled, not the tentative smile of a girl unsure of her place, but the smile of a soul that had finally come home. That morning they sat together and spoke of everything, of the past, of the pain, of the bond that had never truly broken. Velkan confessed how, after her death, he had sealed himself away from the world, refusing to feed on humans, refusing to feel. He had ruled the land only out of obligation, guarding it more out of guilt than duty. You were the only one who ever saw me, he said, not as a monster, but as a man. Elira placed her hand over his heart. You are still that man, but now you are not alone. News of Elira's survival spread through Gravenfall like wildfire. The villagers had expected her death, prepared to mourn her silently as they always had the chosen. But when the castle sent word that she was alive, protected by Lord Velkan, everything changed. Some were fearful, others were curious, but most were grateful. Velkan invited the village to send representatives to speak, to see for themselves that the curse was no longer a curse. The era of sacrifice was over. Instead, a new pact was formed, one not sealed in blood, but in trust. The vampire who once demanded tribute now offered protection freely, because he had finally found a reason to live again. Weeks passed. One morning, as Elira sat mending a torn cloak by the garden arch, Velkan approached quietly and knelt beside her. From a small velvet pouch he revealed a ring, black stone carved with the same star that appeared in Aveline's tapestry. Elira, he said, voice trembling for the first time in centuries, will you spend this life and all others to come with me? She laughed softly, her eyes filling with tears. I thought you'd never ask. Their wedding was unlike any in the village's history. Held beneath the moonlight in the castle courtyard, surrounded by candlelight and ivy, humans and vampires stood side by side. Elira wore the dress she had sewn the night before her death. The crimson velvet, once meant for mourning, now became a symbol of love that refused to die. As they exchanged vows, the castle seemed to breathe again. Flowers bloomed in long-forgotten corners. The sky above, though still veiled in mist, shimmered faintly, as if the stars themselves were watching. Velkan kissed her, not as a creature of darkness, but as a man reborn. Much later, on a quiet night, Elira walked the corridors of Castle Varn Hollow and paused before the old portrait of Aveline. She smiled, then reached into her satchel and pulled out a needle. Carefully, she stitched a new border along the bottom of the tapestry. Not just Aveline anymore, but Elira Aveline, Seamstress of Gravenfall, Bride of the Night. Sometimes, love returns not to repeat the past, but to rewrite it. We are not just who we were, we are who we choose to become. And sometimes even a poor village seamstress can stitch together a broken destiny and turn death into a second chance at love. If this story touched your heart, please like the video. Share it with someone who believes in timeless love. Comment what part moved you most and subscribe to the channel for more Gothic romantic stories like this one. Your support helps us bring more magic to life.